Welcome to Big Papa Rob's podcast story rewind, The Missing. I'm Big Papa Rob. Each of my stories are about one of the many missing people out there. I rewind the story of a missing person in hopes that someone will hear this story and can share information to help find this missing person. There is always someone who knows something that can help find these people. The story I have today is a very old missing person case from right here in Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, when I searched NamUs, it's the oldest missing female case in Georgia. We're going to talk about Mary Shotwell Little. She went missing October 14th, 1965, in the Lenox Square Shopping Center in Buckhead. Before we get started in today's story, as you're aware, I've been a little slow getting podcasts out this year. I've been working on getting information on some new cases, but I've also been under the weather as well. If you listen to my podcast regularly, you may have noticed I close my podcast talking about how I couldn't do this without the support of my wife, aka Big Mama. Well, I have asked her to join me on the podcast and want to introduce my wife, Mandy, to the show.
Hi, y'all.
So, Mandy, have you ever heard of the Mary Stockwell case?
No, I have not. I've lived in Georgia my entire life, and I've never heard of this case, so I'm looking forward to getting into this with you.
This week, we decided to tell an older missing person story I came across about Mary Shotwell Little. She was born January 14th, 1940 in Greensboro, North Carolina. There's not a lot of information about her before she went missing. She was the daughter of Nathan Rudolph and Margaret Proctor Shotwell. She studied to be a secretary at North Carolina College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. In 1962, Mary moved from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia. She started a new job as a secretary at the Mitchell Street branch of the Citizens and Southern Bank, also known as C&S Bank. She lived with 3 roommates, 2 of which worked at the bank as well, Sandra Green and Judy Brownlee. The 3rd roommate was Martha McCarthy, a school teacher. Until she married Roy H. Little, Jr. in 1965. Roy also worked at the C&S Bank as a bank examiner. On Monday, October 11th, 1965, Roy has to go out of town to a C&S Bank in LaGrange, Georgia, to audit the bank. He's scheduled to return home that Friday. On Tuesday, he calls his wife and speaks to her, not knowing it would be the last time.
So Tuesday was the last time that he spoke to his wife on the phone.
Yes. Now you got to remember, we didn't have cell phones like you and me, we talk on a daily basis, especially if I'm out of town.
Yeah.
So phone charges back then would have been probably a long distance call from where he was at. Now, it doesn't say whether he called her that night or from work. If he called her that night, it'd probably be from a hotel, so that would probably be quite an expensive phone call or a phone booth.
That's true. It could have been that. Or maybe she even told him they were okay with the whole thing, and she just said, I'll see you on Friday.
That's true.
Too.
On Thursday, October 14th, Mary went to work as usual. After work, it was said that Mary bought some groceries and then met a friend/coworker at the Piccadilly cafeteria that was located in Lenox Square Shopping Center in Buckhead. If you're not familiar with the Atlanta area, Buckhead is a high-end area of Atlanta, and it was even so back then. According to her friend, Mary seemed fine at dinner. Nothing was wrong with her. And at around 8 p.m., Mary said she ought to be getting home, saying she would see her friend in the morning. This was the last time Mary would be seen. Friday, October 15th, Mary didn't show up for work and didn't call in sick. This was unusual because Mary was a very reliable worker. Mary's boss asked her friend, the one that she'd had dinner with the night before, if Mary had seemed sick the night before. Mary's friend attempted to call Mary at home, but got no answer. They eventually called the apartment manager to have him check on her. The manager stated that the mail and newspaper were still outside, and there was no sign of the groceries that Mary had bought the night before.
So let me kind of backtrack a little. So the manager checked her apartment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the mail and the newspapers were still outside, but he didn't see any groceries that Mary had bought the night before. So we know that, according to the information, that she bought the groceries before she met the friend for dinner. And then the next morning, there's no groceries at the house. So does that mean she never made it to her car when she left her friend at the restaurant the night before?
Not necessarily. As we go further into the story, it seems that the car left Lenox Mall at some point, but we'll cover that in just a second.
Oh, okay.
At this point, Mary's boss reported her missing to the police and then went to look for her car at Lenox Square Shopping Center, where she was last seen. Depending on the source material, Mary's boss found the car or the security guards found it. One source said the car was not in the parking lot when the security guards did the rounds that morning, but it was later seen that afternoon. The car was found around 12:30 p.m., and there was a layer of red dirt on the outside of the car. There was spots of blood in several places, including the driver's side door. Once they opened the unlocked door, the security guards saw a bra laying in the floorboard of the car and blood stains on the seats. They contacted the Atlanta police. Once the police got there, they found in the console her clothes folded neatly, including the dress that she was last seen in, a black slip, and her white laced panties, a white girdle, along with a 9-inch pantyhose that was cleanly cut with the toes clipped off. There were 4 bags of groceries in the back seat. Her car keys, raincoat, and purse was missing.
So her car was found in the Lenox Square Shopping Center. Is that right?
Yes, and actually, related to that, it was not in the same spot from what her friend remembered. It was several spots down from where it was the night before.
Oh. And also, you mentioned red dirt on the outside of the car.
Yes.
It sounds like it was moved.
Exactly. That's what the Atlanta police felt with this case, especially since she lived in town. There wasn't really any dirt roads at that point. So if you're not familiar with Atlanta area, we have red clay predominantly. So it indicated that it went down a dirt road and kicked up some of the red clay on the vehicle. The police quickly determined that Mary was probably still alive because the amount of blood found was very little and explained it could have been a nosebleed. The police began an extensive search of the area, interviewing workers, customers in the shopping center.
So there was a very small amount of blood found in the car. Is that right?
Yes. And a little bit to add to that was it was reported as being more smeared. And some sources and detectives said it looked like it was planted there. Not that it was where she was hit over the head and there was a big amount of blood. It was more smeared on the seats and doors.
Like it was purposefully put there.
Yep.
And of course, they didn't have that DNA technology that we do now. And all they could probably do if they even had enough blood was just type it.
Exactly. That's all they had that back then. And unfortunately, with this case, they've lost a lot of the evidence, even like her clothes and things like that was found. To this day, has became missing.
Oh, wow.
So even if they collected any of the blood, they can't even test it now because they can't find any of the evidence.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, this was well before we had security cameras on every corner. At some point in the investigation, they learned that Mary's car had an unexplained 40 miles on it and had been parked several spots over from where it had been parked the night she went missing, based on the friend's testimony of that night.
Okay, so they said there was 40 extra miles that were unexplained on her car. One, that could explain the red dirt that was on her car, where somebody had driven it somewhere. But two, how did they know how many miles were on the car before?
Well, based on the information I read, the husband provided this I guess he was considered very tight. So he knew about how many miles she drove from home to work each day. And that's kind of where they came up with the 40 miles. But you're right. That also contributed to that red dirt on the side of the car.
Yeah.
It was later discovered that Mary's gas card was used in Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. The gas attendants at these stations reported that they remembered seeing a woman with a minor head injury in the car that matched her description, and that she was traveling with one or two men, one being described as an unshaved middle-aged man who seems to be commanding her. The card appeared to be used in the early morning hours of October 15th and later that afternoon. Police say the signatures on the receipts match her handwriting. This seemed odd to me since she lived in Charlotte, North Carolina before she moved to Atlanta. Could whoever abducted her known her from when she lived in North Carolina?
It almost seems like somebody might have been watching her, because it says her car only had 40 miles on it, but you can't get from Atlanta to Charlotte or Raleigh, North Carolina in 40 miles. It's going to take a few hours to get there. So somebody else, if they had her, would have had to taken her in a separate vehicle to get there in order for that credit card to be used. And then again, they said it looked like her signature, and some man was commanding her there.
Now you got to remember too that you're correct. There's no way to drive from Atlanta to Charlotte, which is about 4 hours and it's about 245 miles. So that would indicate that there's more than one person, because we know when the security guards did their patrol that morning of the 15th, her car wasn't in the parking lot, but it showed back up at 12:30. So somebody had to drive it back somewhere that before 12:30 to park it in the parking lot. And they didn't know the exact spot it came from because it was a few spots down.
And where did they take it?
Exactly. I mean, at this point, there's no information or speculation of that. The other part is with the credit card, it appeared to be used the first time at around 12:30 in the morning of the 15th, which if you look at her being taken at 8 o'clock on the 14th and the card being used at 12:30, it's almost an exact amount of time to drive from Atlanta to North Carolina. So there wasn't a lot of playroom to do anything else. Now, with that said, with these credit cards, they probably didn't know about the credit card information until the next month, because this isn't electronic where things show up instantly on the internet for your billing.
It was the slider
It
thing,
would be an old
impression of the
slider
card.
with the signature. And so it probably wasn't discovered until her husband got the credit card bill the next month to raise there's 2 charges on here from North Carolina right after she went missing. Roy, Mary's husband, was investigated in her disappearance, but he had a solid alibi being out of town for work at the time she went missing. It was reported that he didn't even seem bothered about his wife being missing and was more worried about the car, wanting his car back as soon as possible. It's also reported that he refused to take a lie detector test. The police continued to think his actions, or lack of actions, suspicious. One of the things that the FBI noted was that he bought tickets for a football game 4 days after his wife went missing.
So his wife goes missing, and when he's notified of that, he's more worried about her car and wanting to get that back. That seems strange.
Yes. Now, obviously he's back in town. I don't know how much time elapsed, but that was their only vehicle. And there was other things that made the police look at it. One of the times when he was in the police precinct, there was another crime unrelated to theirs that he overheard information on. And when he came back in for the next visit, instead of first asking, "Do you have any updates on my wife?" he wanted to know, was there any updates on the other crime that he heard about the day he was in the police station.
Oh.
He also, not too long after her disappearance, I couldn't find out the period of time, but he went to Las Vegas and got his marriage annulled and remarried. But I don't know if it was a year, 2 years, exactly what, but he quickly, it was noted in the police files that he quickly remarried.
So, did they ever say that they suspected some kind of reason why he wouldn't want an annulment, or why they suspected him, or did they even give you any kind of clues as to he would have something to do with it, or he would know something about what happened to his wife?
No, it was more his actions or lack of. He was just not as cooperative, or his reactions to things wasn't what the police felt that he should have had with his wife's disappearance.
Okay.
As part of the investigation, it was reported that friends and co-workers stated that Mary was getting odd phone calls at work before she vanished. One co-worker reportedly overheard Mary saying on one of these calls, "You know I can't come over there. Roy's out of town. I don't hold anything against you. You can come over to my house anytime, but I can't come over there." Another person overheard her on Monday before she disappeared telling someone, "No, you know I'm a married woman." They also said that Mary had gotten roses delivered the week before from a secret admirer. It seems that Mary reportedly had told her friends that she had something important to tell them, but they never found out what it was. Now, Mandy, as you watch and listen to true crime all the time yourself, how many times have you heard someone say, "She said she had something important to tell me, but never told me," and that was the last time they ever heard from that particular person? So, it's one of those true crime things. If you've got something, Tell your friends, especially if it may be something that puts you in danger. What do you think?
Well, she may not have had a chance to. There could have been a reason why she didn't tell them right away, because they did say that she was having strange phone calls, and they talked about the kind of calls she was having, and somebody was sending her flowers at work, and maybe it was something she couldn't talk about right then, and she had to wait before she could tell them, and then before she actually got the chance, something happened to her. She disappeared.
It's a shame, though, because whatever this was may have been what would have solved her case and pointed the finger at somebody.
So, have the police ever said they found out who were sending the flowers or who the phone calls were from? Has that ever been talked about?
Nope. They don't have any other than what was given to them from the co-workers. They don't have any way of knowing. I mean, obviously back then they didn't have ways to track phone calls like you do now. When the call comes in, it pops up. Being a business, and this was apparently at work, who knows which phone numbers it could have came from.
Yeah.
In January 1994, Atlanta police had a tip come in about Mary's case and where her body might be. A woman said that she was present when a woman, presumably Mary, was killed and buried under a concrete floor in Forsyth County. A search warrant was obtained and a search was done, but no body was found. Now, this was supposedly some kind of a repair garage, and there was a dispute over payment, and the person there took a tire iron or something and hit this woman over the head and killed her. And the police really thought they were going to have something there. They brought in one of those machines where they can kind of x-ray through the ground.
Yeah, scans the ground.
Yeah, and they said they saw something, but when they finally got the warrant to bust open the floor and go down, there wasn't anything there. So they had a little bit of false hope. They tried to do everything the right way and hoping this would be the close of the case, but nothing was there. There has been many theories over the years, one being related to a supposed sex scandal at the bank she worked at, which was described as a prostitution on bank premises and a lesbian harassment. The FBI was apparently called to investigate, but no charges were filed. It was rumored that Mary knew about this scandal.
So are they suspecting, or has it been mentioned that they think that Mary knew about that, and maybe that has something to do with her disappearance, that she was going to tell somebody or say something?
There's no evidence of it, but that's just one of the theories that was out there. There's also a theory that the mob was involved and there was big money in Atlanta going on in the background, and that this could have been mob related with money laundering. But again, it's all theory. There's no proof of it.
Okay.
Another young lady, Diane Shields, who replaced Mary just weeks after she went missing at C&S Bank. Later, she was let go and went to work for AIG. She went missing May 19th, 1967, after leaving work. She was later found fully clothed, beaten, and dead in the trunk of her car. She was so beaten that she had to be identified by her engagement ring and clothing. It was reported that Diane had been investigating Mary's unsolved case and was working undercover for the police. Now, that there was no real proof of that. Witnesses said that she had one of the detectives' business card with her and would pull it out saying she was part of the investigation, but the police denied that she was ever really part of that investigation. Another tie that Diane had with Mary was that after she started working at the bank, she became roommates with Judy Brownlee, one of the same roommates that Mary had before she got married. Investigators in this case believe that the two cases were related But other than working at the same place and being close to the same age, there was no real evidence to connect the two cases. With all the source information I was using, there is so many ties tying these two cases back and forth. They actually said Diane's murder, like I said, she was fully clothed, so there wasn't any rape as part of the murder. Nothing was stolen. I mean, like she had her diamond ring still. But there was paper or something shoved down her throat that made the police think it was more of a mob hit and was done in such a way to send a message to be quiet or whatever. And that they also wondered with Mary's case if it was a mob hit or a message being sent, because both Mary's car and Diane's car was left at a public place where it would be found.
There was paper shoved down Diane's throat, you said?
Yes.
Okay. When it was removed, was it like any kind of particular paper? The information, like you were saying, maybe they said it could be related to the mob. Was it certain, like any particular kind of paper? Did it have any particular writing on it, or was it just random paper?
None of the sources said exactly what it was. Maybe it's because being evidence that they want to keep their cards close to their chest so that they don't, if they find the right person, they can use that as part of the evidence. And Diane's case has never been solved either. During my investigation, I came across a very good podcast series called 5 Roses that covered both Diane and Mary's case and had some very interesting theories about both cases. This podcast went into extreme depth with interviews of past investigators and current investigative team, and went down and talked about a lot more theories than what I've mentioned here. One specific theory that came from that podcast is about Larry Shotwell. I think I pronounced that correct. In September 1966, writes a letter to the police from prison saying that he and another friend was approached about a job and would get paid $5,000 each for it. This job was to kidnap Mary and drive her to North Carolina to a house and keep her captive. Larry and his friend Gerald Mason and the guy that paid them put Mary in the back of a car and drove her back to Atlanta after they had her captive. And according to Larry, the third guy in the back seat with Mary grabs Mary by the mouth, pulls her to him, and cuts her throat with a knife and pushes her to the floor of the car and covers her with a rug.
Okay, is it supposed to be Mary's car?
No.
It was another car. Because I remember in Mary's car, they said there was just a little bit of blood in there, like a nosebleed. So clearly this, with cutting her throat, that would be a massive, major amount of blood loss in that car.
Yes. Because this was, and the odd thing about that part of the story is, why would you drive her to North Carolina and then attempt to bring her back to Atlanta, and within a few minutes of your drive back to Atlanta, you slit her throat and put her in the floor of the car? Why wouldn't you, if you're going to kill her, why not kill her while she's in North Carolina and get rid of her there?
I don't know. Maybe that's one of the things about this whole case. None of it makes sense.
Now, and also as part of this, Larry goes on to say that he drops the other two guys off at a hotel in Atlanta, and a week later he runs into Gerald, and Gerald shows him where they buried Mary's body at the Atlanta airport. This confession wasn't believed to be true and was written as a ploy for him to try to get out of prison at the time. You know, these inmates where they rat on each other and stuff.
And try to make a deal to get out early or something like that.
But it didn't work. I don't know if they investigated the airport burial thing. Supposedly, he used a telescope to show the other guy where it was on the airport property, but there's no information that says the police actually followed up on it.
So who is this Gerald guy?
He was just another friend that Larry knew. Both of them have criminal histories, and they actually both ended up dying in prison with unrelated crimes.
Oh, okay.
But as being a theory, he seemed to know a lot of information about the case and the North Carolina side of it. But back then, how close to the vest did investigators really keep their cards on the finding the credit card receipt in North Carolina? So it may have been in the news and someone told him about it and just made up the story. But there's something to it because of the story itself. It could be believable. As I mentioned before, another theory was the mob was involved and that there was corruption with CNS Bank, and that these two ladies were killed to send a message to people at the bank to keep quiet, and the police were told to cover it up. And some of that theory about the police comes from even investigators today being limited on some of the information that they can get from the reports, and evidence that mysteriously just disappeared over the years. Supposedly the clothing that was in the car, it's gone. There's no evidence that the blood samples that was in the car is around anymore. One source material said there was a fingerprint on the steering wheel, but they didn't have good collections at that point, so they can't even necessarily, if they even found that in the evidence, could take it and run it through the system where all the fingerprints and everything is now.
So her family has never gotten any more information than what they originally were told when she first went missing years ago?
From my understanding, yeah. At this point, both her mom and dad have passed away. I think the dad passed away in the 70s and the mother in the 2000s. And I found that she had a sister that just recently, last few years, passed away as well.
Oh, wow. I hope that more information comes to light for her family, and the authorities can hopefully find out what happened to her.
As of today, this case still hasn't ever been solved, and her body has never been found. Mary Shotwell Little was 25 years old at the time she went missing. She was described as a white female with light brown hair, hazel green eyes. She had a discoloration on her left arm and wore glasses. If you have any information about this case, contact the Atlanta Police at 404-853-3434. Case number AT79-159. The stories we tell about the missing, I hope, arms you with new information about this missing person that might lead to finding them. Additionally, I hope that you will share the information about this person in hopes that by sharing, it may lead to their locating this person. As with almost all missing person cases, there is someone out there that knows something. Please come forward and contact the authorities. Once again, I'm Big Papa Rob, and this was an independent podcast called Story Rewind. Story Rewind, The Missing, is written, produced, and edited by Big Papa Rob. I couldn't do this without the support of my wonderful wife, Mandy, and I'm so glad that she joined me on this podcast today. If you'd like to donate to help me cover my operating costs, you can buy me a cup of coffee. You can find the link in my show notes or on my social media pages. Your support would be greatly appreciated. I'd like a 5-star rating if you listen to my podcast through Apple Podcasts. And finally, if you have a story idea, please contact me through my social media. A link for my social media accounts is listed in the show notes. I would love to hear from you. Today's music was The Shield by Hot Dope from Pixabay. This was a Big Papa Rob Podcast 2024. See the show notes for links to the reference material used in this podcast.